Okay, and welcome back. Here we go again. It's a Wednesday. All kinds of things happening all over the world. It's like a cauldron just about to bubble over. Where will it bubble over first, or will it bubble over at all? I don't know. It could bubble over in Ukraine at any time. The new premier there, in his first interview since taking office, or being installed in office, remember Victoria Nuland, Ukraine's new prime minister vigorously defended the legality of his government against attacks coming from Russia, but said Wednesday that Ukraine would be willing to consider granting more autonomy to the Crimea region to assuage the concerns of the province's pro-Russian population. But he didn't say it could leave. In other words, they're holding on. So lines are being drawn. I don't know where they'll be stepped on or across or anything. We'll have to wait and see. But here to tell us how he sees it is Webster Griffin Tarpley. Well, another one, Webster, out of the playbooks, another color revolution. How's it look to you?
Slightly different from the color revolution in the sense that this one is already much more sinister. And
well said.
The tone is much darker.
Well said.
This was not, golden youth cavorting on the square with flowers. This was heavy-duty fascist gangs going out, beating people up.
Yep.
I think if you were going to call the other one the Orange Revolution, you might want to call this one the Brown Revolution, or the Hooligan Revolution, or maybe the Molotov...
the Thug Revolution.
The Molotov Cocktail Revolution.
Yeah, the Thug,
that's really
Molotov,
the most prominent symbol, right? If you saw the small tank of the police that was submerged really under a shower of Molotov bottles on the famous night of the bonfires from February 18th to 19th.
Well, they also found out that the snipers were hired by one of the groups that shouldn't have been hiring anybody. You saw that. There's a phone call that I guess it was Estonia got hold of it and released it, and they're standing behind it.
This is a little bit different. This is the Estonian foreign minister.
Correct.
Who has been to Kiev since the coup. The coup is essentially, you can place the coup between Friday the 21st of February and Saturday the 22nd, and then consolidation into Sunday the 23rd. But this is now the foreign minister of Estonia. His name is Urmas Paet, P-A-E-T.
Correct.
And he's on the phone with the Baroness Ashton, this dumb, wretched woman, the European Union foreign policy boss. And he tells her that there's overwhelming evidence that the snipers that were in action during that week, the week of the bonfires, more or less, that these were hired by the then opposition, in other words, the anti-Yanukovych, the Russophobic fascist groups, hired the snipers and told them to go kill anybody they could. It's a typical third force. It's a very, very instructive thing. This, of course, is straight CIA theory.
You bet.
The third force gets in the middle and kills people on both sides. He says they were told to kill police and to kill demonstrators. So you've got to rile them up on both sides. And Ashton, of course, having received this authoritative report from one of the member countries, the foreign minister of one of the member countries of the European Union, she ignores it. Right? She didn't come out and give a press conference saying, "I'm shocked. I found that the killings were funded by the opposition that we've been supporting." So you're dealing, of course, with a tremendous propaganda campaign, mass hysteria. The prostitutes are all mobilized.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's happening that I should mention, and maybe we talk about it in some more detail, is there's a mass defection of these journalists at Russia Today. And I haven't been on Russia Today for a year and a half, 2 years. And in the meantime, they've loaded up with these left liberal gatekeeper types. And in particular, they had Abby Martin, who she says she was once a 9/11 truth activist. I know she was invited to the 9/11 Truth Conference here in Washington last September. They were going to give her a prize, believe it or not, and she refused to come. So I think her her independent thinking is in the past. Anyway,
a prize for what? Narcissism?
No, for 9/11 truth, because she made some oblique references. It was a wretched gesture to begin with, and then she scorned it. So that was a double whammy from her. But she gets on television yesterday or Monday and says, I think what Russia is doing is wrong. Abby Martin needs to remember that if we need anti-Russian, anti-Putin slanders to dissect and refute, we can get those from NBC, ABC, PBS, CBS. We can get those on all of the U.S. corporate media. Then Russia Today really ought to provide some kind of an antidote, right? Some kind of a differing view.
You would think.
You'd think, but not Abby Martin. I think she's bidding for something else. She was just on. I think she got on Anderson Cooper this afternoon, but for sure she was just on Piers Morgan on CNN.
The cadaver.
Who, of course, is himself on his way out.
Yeah.
And she said that her moral compass required her to speak up against the Russian actions. I would urge her to study the problem of fascism and what it means to have a fascist state and an aggressive one in the middle of Europe as a NATO puppet, and think about what that means and try to readjust her moral compass. The other thing is another one of these commentators on Russia Today, Liz Wall, W-A-H-L. She simply quit on the air, and that got her an invitation to Piers Morgan and CNN. And I'm afraid that this is the consequence of a misguided hiring policy at Russia Today.
Well, I think you're right. The chickens are coming home, no question. Did Martin quit, or is she still employed?
She's still there, but I can't imagine how she can remain. I mean, this is this is up to this Margarita Simonyan, who is the boss of Russia Today, and her line has essentially been to tail after Ron Paul, to tail after Assange, to tail after Snowden, things like this. And what do we find now? Assange, of course, used his program on RT to argue that he had Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, on his program, and he tried to convince Nasrallah to dump the Syrian government. In other words, to turn against Assad. This was an amazing thing to see in that broadcast. And then with Snowden, we've just had Snowden's principal scribe, Glenn Greenwald, of course, now with Jeremy Scahill working for this Pierre Omidyar. And thanks to a website called Panda, I think, they're exposed, this Omidyar is exposed as having funded the Kiev opposition, in other words, the groups that carried out the putsch, to the tune of more than $500,000. And Greenwald is very huffy, right? He says, how dare you associate me with this guy just because he is now the guy who pays my bills? And Scahill is the same thing, right? These are the typical left liberal gatekeepers. The problem with Russia Today is they've got to get away from the policy of giving over their airtime to people who hate Russia, because there's no other way to put it. In other words,
Abby Martin showed her true colors, is what you're saying.
I'm afraid so. And there's also a guy called Sam Sachs. I wonder what he's going to do. He's one of their commentators also. Now that Wall has quit and Abby has attacked Russia, he says he supports Abby.
Sam Sack?
Pardon me?
His name is Sam Sack?
Yes, Sam Sachs is the guy.
Sam is going to be sacked. Abby Martin...
I don't know. That would be, I think, healthy, but I'm not at all sure.
They need to clean house. Here, let me say one thing. We've got to take a break here. Get a drink of water. Look, Abby Martin, if any of you have seen her, is rather consumed with her appearance, shall we say. And I must also say, Webster, as a journalist, she is, without question, direly in need of going to some kind of vocal coach to learn how to read. The woman does not know how to read a sentence, cannot accentuate and emphasize the right words or phrases within a paragraph. It's like a car wreck. I'm just stunned. I thought English was her second language for a while. So, at any rate, she's a glamour star and a celeb, and she's made, and she'll have no trouble getting a job somewhere else. It just looked to me like another rocket to stardom for.
But in the meantime, Russia today really ought to present a differing view.
They need to clean house.
I think so.
I agree. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, back with Webster. I should, if you don't mind, Webster, let me just play this. It's a minute long, the Abby Martin rant from her heart, because a lot of people didn't hear it, and they probably should hear it. But if you've ever seen Abby Martin, you know that she's a fashion plate and obviously very much taken with herself. And unfortunately doesn't know how to read. One of the most clumsy readers I've ever seen. Now, that doesn't mean she can't improve herself, and I hope she does, because she's representing a profession, our profession, that does require at least a modicum of competence, and she could certainly do better. Here's her comment.
From my heart about the ongoing political crisis in Ukraine and Russia's military occupation of Crimea. Just because I work here for RT doesn't mean I don't have editorial independence. And I can't stress enough how strongly I am against any state intervention in a sovereign nation's affairs. What Russia did is wrong. I admittedly don't know as much as I should about Ukraine's history or the cultural dynamics of the region, but what I do know is that military intervention is never the answer. And I will not sit here and apologize or defend military aggression. Furthermore, the coverage I've seen of Ukraine has been truly disappointing from all sides of the media spectrum and rife with disinformation. Above all, my heart goes out to the Ukrainian people, who are now wedged as pawns in the middle of a global power chess game. They're the real losers here. All we can do now is hope for a peaceful outcome for a terrible situation and prevent another full-blown Cold War between multiple superpowers. Until then, I'll keep telling the truth as I see it. Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you back here to break the set tomorrow.
Oh, boy, she's something else.
And look, what I think is missing from this self-righteousness is
totally.
You notice what she's got is moral equivalence. Now, moral equivalence, she says, Putin is bad, U.S. bad, everybody bad, Ukrainian people good. I don't know why they would be good in such a world, but what she's missing is this problem of who's the aggressor, who's acting defensively, who's acting offensively.
She missed the whole story.
The aggressor is clearly the United States and NATO, because this is the USAID has pumped in $5 million or so to fund these fascist groups. Kerry is now talking about $1 billion more of our money.
Correct.
When we're cutting food stamps to fund this bunch of fascist cliquists there in Kiev, thugs. And the fact that Putin is trying to protect Russia from Ukraine joining NATO and then becoming the spear point of some kind of an assault in various terms on Russia, a breakup of Russia. It's what we talked about 5 years ago, the Brzezinski plan, right?
Exactly right.
The breakup of the Russian Federation in the same way that the USSR had been broken up, and there's not clear cut at all. And I think anybody reasonable would actually have to say, well, the Crimea with all those Russians and the fact that they have rented the bases there for another 30 years, and the similar situation in Kharkov, this big industrial city along the Russian border, and the Donetsk, this entire Donetsk-Donbass area, one of the most highly industrialized in the world, and this is actually where the economic value of Ukraine comes from coal mining and steel mills in that area. It is not so obvious that 20 or 30,000 extremists in a public square, blown out of all proportion by the Western media, and then helped along by NATO and these foreign ministers who were there. Not so clear that they ought to be allowed to seize the government, simply, as we hear from Kerry, because Yanukovych left his post. In other words, he left the country because he feared assassination, and the police had deserted him.
He was threatened. Yeah,
he was threatened. Now, part of this is his problem is that he's Mr. Chicken Kiev. There's no way around it. He needed to crack down. He didn't do it, and therefore the police were getting tired of having their lives lost because he wouldn't let them have weapons. He sent them out disarmed. If you saw his post-coup press conference there from Rostov-on-Don, he says, I admire the police because they stood there with no guns. Well, why didn't they have guns? Because of him.
Yeah.
He said no guns for you because he was afraid of the Western media or some kind of backlash. And now he realizes he should have feared something else. He needed to build on his security forces, and he needed to build on the Russian population, but he couldn't figure that out. But be that as it may, he, as Putin says, he's corrupt, he's a failure, he's Chicken Kiev, but he's actually the president of the country. And according to Kerry's logic, the next time Obama leaves Washington, then a coup d'etat would be perfectly legitimate, right? Because you could say he deserted his post, right? He went to Hawaii on a vacation, or he went, out of the country.
Yeah, your point is well taken.
Whatever it is.
Absolutely.
But look, what I would suggest, what we can do here tonight in the allotted time, I think, is to try to stress some points that you're not likely to hear anywhere else. Okay? Let me just try to go through some.
Go to it.
I've been trying to develop a kind of a short course, right? A half-hour or 40-minute course in what you really need to know about this, because there are certain key points that are not stressed.
If I might say one thing before you start, this woman is representative of again, a profession that has lost its way. She is clueless about what happened over there, who did what, who was behind what, where the money came from. I can't even imagine being that vapid when it comes to such an important story. But there it is. Go ahead.
I think there's a lot to that, Jeff. And you notice that they offered to send her over there for fact-finding. In other words, they said, look, we'll send you to Crimea and Ukraine, and you can report on the spot. She doesn't want to do that. She admits she doesn't know, and then that she doesn't want to know. And I'm really sorry. I've been on that program a couple of times. It's not like she's, a hopeless case from the very beginning. But somehow
she also couldn't
the power of this left liberal human rights world is overwhelming.
It is. She also could not pronounce Crimea. If you notice that, she's not close. I've noticed. I like the English language like you do. I like words to be used properly. I like a good read. If you read, they all read. We understand that, but this woman needs a course of basic
I actually
reading.
noticed in the course of that statement that she was actually halting at certain key points.
Yeah.
Let me just point out a couple of things now. A lot of this stuff goes back to the Second World War, right? And, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Hitler-Stalin Pact, which divided much of this area. Parts of most of what is Ukraine ended up on the Soviet side of the line.
That's Yalta.
Yeah. Well, no, this is Molotov-Ribbentrop, right? And
before.
Yalta too. If you read Churchill's memoirs, he says, I was not prepared to make a great squawk about Lemberg. And let's start our story in Lemberg. This is the Western Ukraine, right? This is where this government comes from, as I call it, the Kiev fascist clique. When I say government, I mean this group, right? It's Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and President Turchinov. They are both puppets of Julia Timoshenko, the kleptocrat, the gas princess, who looted the country.
Sure did.
And a failed government from the time of the Orange Revolution in 2004 until she went to jail, essentially, in 2010.
Yeah. Well, we have to take a break. Hold on. We have to take a break, then we'll start. By the way, Yulia was calling for armed intervention on the side of Ukrainians.
She's working through Amanpour of CNN to try to turn the U.S. media in favor of World War III.
Fortunately, the Russians were able to intercept at least one attempted shipment of explosives, 400 kilos of explosive and weapons in a number of automobiles at the Crimea border, and they got those. They were going to be used for car bombs, obviously. Same old M.O. Same old. One other quick note, the Russians, by treaty, folks, if you didn't know, are allowed to have 25,000 troops in the Crimea, and they only had 16,000. That number is still essentially the same. It hasn't changed. Putin is playing this masterfully so far. Back with Webster, and we'll hear his take on this in short form in just a couple minutes. All right, let's get right back to it. Okay, Webster, go right ahead. We're all ears. Have at it.
All right, so look, just a couple of things about history, right? Russia as a whole begins in Kiev. This is the famous 988, the conversion of the ruler of Kiev and Ukraine, I guess, but Kiev, to Orthodox Christianity. So that's the Christianization of Russia, 988. And from 988 until about 1240, the coming of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, this was an independent entity, a state. But from then on, it went under the Mongol yoke, so it disappears for quite a few centuries. And when it comes out, this is largely because of the efforts of the Grand Dukes of Moscow and then later of the Russian Empire. And there was a Khan of the Crimea. This was a separate thing under Mongol rule until quite late in the day. Okay, so it's a very important thing to note that this is sort of where Russia started. Right? So there's in addition to all the other kinds of importance, there's this importance too, that there's a great feeling in Russia that this should not fall under anti-Russian auspices, which is unfortunately what the current government is. The second thing is the origin of these fascists that we see in the public square goes back to World War II. And when the Nazis came through with Barbarossa and were attacking the Soviet Union, there was a significant group of Ukrainians who decided to support them, right? And these were people who had been under the Russian Empire. Some of them had been under the Habsburg Empire. Some of them had been under Prussia even, right? But they gravitated towards a guy called Stefan Bandera. And Bandera was the leader of a kind of an SS division, the Galicia division of the Nazi SS, and they fought against the Soviets. After that, when the war was over, Bandera escaped. He went to Munich and became part of the Radio Free Europe complex. And according to quite a few, he was an assassination bureau. He directed the assassination of key leaders in the Soviet Ukraine now, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republics. People wonder why Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine. Well, he was sort of from Ukraine himself, Brezhnev too, more or less, and they wanted to gratify Ukrainians and get them to turn away from these terrorists, I guess we'd have to say, operating for NATO. So the problem that you have now is that of the parties that are in the current government, right? You have the Fatherland government, the Fatherland Party. That's the President Turchinov and the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. These are basically straight sort of business suit IMF agents, right? But in addition to them, there are two other parties that are really the places where this Nazi nostalgia is the most prominent. And one is the so-called Svoboda Party, or Freedom Party. And this is led by a guy called Oleg, or Oleg. People who have some idea of Russian should just be aware that the G in Russian tends to turn into an H in Ukrainian, as it does even in southern Russia to some extent. But this is a guy called Chanibok. He's the head of the party. And he's written up in all kinds of European studies of modern fascism, extreme right-wing, racist politics. He's anti-Russian, anti-Semitic, anti-Polish, anti-foreigner, and we'll go through some of the people in his party. But this is the big Bandera party. And then, even more extreme and even more in the mob, right, the Kiev fascist mob that we've seen, is this right sector. And we just mentioned a couple of things about both of these. But let's just look at Svoboda, because you see the line of the new government coming from Turchinov and the president and Yatsenyuk, the prime minister, is that there is no problem of extreme right-wingers in this government. And indeed, they say there are no fascists in Ukraine. They just don't exist. But they do. And here's who they are. The Chanibok party includes him, and again, you'd have to assume that anybody who's in that party is automatically xenophobic, hates Russia, hates the Jews, hates the Poles. They actually hate the Germans, although they submerge this, right, to various practical purposes. But it gets into the power ministries, right? We should just look at these power ministries. Who's, for example, the defense minister? Well, the defense minister is a guy called Tenyuk, and he comes from the Ukrainian Navy, and he's a member of Svoboda. So if you're in Moscow, how would you like to have the defense minister of Ukraine being somebody who is in a political party that's openly in the tradition of Stefan Bandera, and they even have this thing called the Wolfsangel, which is a runic sign, and it's obviously their version of the swastika, and that's their flag. Okay, you might say, well, maybe he's not the only one in the party. Let's look at the National Security and Defense Council. Who do we find there? Here we find a guy called Parubi, and he's in the Svoboda Bandera SS Galicia division. And then even worse, a guy called Yarosh. And Yarosh is, again, he's the heart and soul of the mob. This is somebody who went to fight alongside the Chechen terrorists against the Russians in Chechnya in the 1990s. And this is the guy, Yarosh is the one who, over the weekend, put out a call to the Chechen terrorist leader, Doku Umarov, saying, we fought for you in the past, now you have to join us, we have to attack the Russians, this is a great chance for us, right, so you should join in because we need you. Russia has said that they are seeking an Interpol warrant for international terrorism against this guy Yarosh, and I think that's fully justified. Now, the press service of this right sector says, oh no, that was a hacker who put that up there. Well, I'm afraid that will not solve the problem, because if we look a little bit further into this right sector, again, in the government, the deputy of this guy Yarosh, or one of his brigade commanders, I guess as they say, is a real horrendous thug by the name of Alex Muzichko. And Muzichko has said he will spend his life and die fighting against Jews, Russians, and communists. That's his creed. And he also went to take part in the Chechen War against Russia. And when we come back, I can tell you his scorecard that he talks about all the time, how many Russians he killed fighting alongside Prince Bandar's terrorists in Chechnya.
Including children, no doubt. What a group of vile human beings.
That's who's going to get your money.
Yeah, for sure. That's right. Hold on a minute, and Webster and I will be right back with this unique overview of who's who in Ukraine. Okay, back with Webster and learning a lot as always. Go ahead, Webster. Okay, we've gone through a rogues gallery of killers. You were going to tell us about this.
Couple of more.
Before you did that, he was in Chechnya. You were going to tell us about his scorecard.
Yeah, he says he goes his standard stump speeches. He says, "I fought alongside the terrorists there in Chechnya, killing Russians, and I was personally responsible for destroying 3 tanks, 3 armored personnel carriers, and an artillery piece." And that's sort of his stump speech. If you look on the internet, there's a tape of him beating up a district attorney while the police stand around because they're so afraid because this guy has a phalanx of machine gun toting hoodlums in ski masks. So that's Muzichko. So that's right. Yarosh. Again, Yarosh is on the committee that controls the defense ministry and the armed forces. So you got Yarosh, you got Muzichko. A third guy from the right sector, and again, this is the heart of the actual mob, Tarasenko, and he wants Ukraine to be a nuclear power, right? When the Soviets collapsed, quite a few ICBMs and other missiles were left in Ukraine, and they kept them, and then these were gradually removed through various treaties, with the U.S. pressing them to get rid of them. Tarasenko says he wants these nuclear weapons back. Now, again, look at those hooligans you saw in the Kiev fascist mob, and ask yourself, do you want to have them with ICBMs, right? Wouldn't it be more dangerous than the other proliferation scenarios that we're always supposed to be so afraid of, right? The State Department is so concerned about Iran, which I don't think is concerning at all, but in this case, the Ukrainian proliferation problem seems to attract no attention whatsoever. Tarasenko also wants to grab territory away from Poland. This is really interesting because Poland has been a patron of the Kiev fascist mob, and this is how he thanks them. In other words, this is this explosive combination that we see. So, a couple of others. In terms of social policy, there's a guy called Sich, or maybe just Sick, and Sick is the deputy prime minister. His view is that rape is always caused by women. The lifestyle of women is the principal cause of rape, and the answer is ban all abortions, says Sick. Then we have, there's a guy called Schweika, and the good soldier Schweika is also from the Svoboda party. How about this? He's the food minister. So suppose you're a Russian, and you're looking to get some food, and you realize that you're going to have to get it from the good soldier Schweika.
Yeah.
Similarly, another member of this gaggle is a woman called Chernobyl. I call her Chernobyl. Chernobyl, that's also in Ukraine. She's the anti-corruption minister. And again, she's going to come after you and say, oh, you're a Russian, are you? Well, then you're going to be indicted.
And we're paying for all these people. This is
you are.
American tax
again,
dollars.
USAID has already put in $5 million. This guy, Omidyar, right, the one who pays for Scahill and our dear friend Greenwald, he has invested in. I'm sure others have. The oligarch who contributed most to the revolution is the chocolate king. He's a guy called Tarasenko. And the chocolate part is very interesting because we can't really go into this now. There is a world chocolate cartel, along with grain and along with a few other things. This is an old institution. It's run, the center of it is Cadbury Fry in London, but if you're a chocolate manufacturer, you're likely to be somehow a part of this chocolate thing, and he's the one who was paying the fascist mob the $25 a day stipends to stay in the square that kept them going. Now, the answer of the pro-Maidan forces to this kind of a lineup, right, and I could go on, I could give you a few more, they say,
got the idea.
Oh, that's only 5,000 of the most active ones in the square, right? That are fascist. Yeah, but wait, the whole thing was only 20 to 30,000 if they were lucky, right? And then they said, well, it got up to 200,000 or 300,000. Yeah, on 1 or 2 days, right? When it was
out of 45 million.
Yeah, out of 45 million. So this has got time bombs under it. The first thing is the IMF austerity program, which Yanukovych was smart enough to turn away from. Yatsenyuk, the prime minister, and Turchinov, the president, both of them tools of the gas princess, they say, brace yourself, gang, harsh austerity coming down.
One of the first things they talked about was austerity.
That's the first thing, right? That's the first thing they said. It's going to be really rough. One of the things is there's a state subsidy, government subsidy on gas in a place that's pretty cold. They're going to remove the subsidy. So the price of gas is going to triple, quadruple. That's already going to make them hated. Yatsenyuk says his job is a suicide mission, I guess, the kamikaze mission. The other thing, though, is the IMF wants to cut pensions, cut health care for old people, cut health for children, devalue the currency, right? The entire IMF catalog is now going to be inflicted on these poor people. And,
that's right.
That's the effect of this revolution. The other thing is the rivalry. Timoshenko obviously wants to be president. The other person who wants to be president is the Palooka, right? You've seen him, this huge guy, Klitschko.
Newland's boy.
She didn't want him in the government. She wanted Yatsenyuk should be in the government because he's a great
No, she wanted to marginalize him. She wanted to move him aside. That was the phone call.
But Klitschko would be available for the presidency as a pure puppet.
Correct.
Because he's brain damaged. In other words, he's the heavyweight champion of the world.
Drunk.
He can't speak. He can't, it's just impossible. He has been shut out. In other words, Klitschko, he leads this thing called the Punch Party, Udar.
That's funny.
The Punch Party. He's absorbed too many of these.
Yeah.
Now look, in brief, what should happen? Well, obviously, the U.S. should butt out. We don't want any part of this. This has nothing to do with the U.S.
Of course.
The aid that Kerry has offered should never be delivered. And I would say the other thing is to defund this USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, Albert Einstein Institute. This apparatus of color revolutions, has gotten subcontracting from these people. These people have to be defunded, right? So you have to butt out of this whole racket of color revolutions, because this is now the second phase of the color revolution of 10 years ago. What's the actual solution? I would say Finlandization. Back in the 50s and 60s, Finland, of course, had been an active ally of Hitler, and they had joined in the attack on the Soviet Union. But the Soviets at that point said, look, Finland, you can remain sovereign country, independent, run your own stuff, but you're going to be neutral, you're not going to join NATO, you're not going to join the European Union, and you're not going to tolerate political parties that promulgate hatred of the Soviets or revenge or, changing the borders or taking back territory. You're going to cool it. And Finland did, I think, relatively well under that. I think that would be the sensible solution for Ukraine. And indeed, part of this Finlandization treaty, of course, was that Finland had to give back territory to the Soviets that they had taken during the Nazi war, right, during Barbarossa. This had to be restored. So I think the package would be something like transfer the Crimea back to Russia, certain other places like Kharkov and Donetsk and this Dnipropetrovsk, where the big dam is located, and some others. Yeah. Send this back. As a matter of fact, the Dnieper River might be a good border between the two.
That's the obvious border.
I guess so. That may well be the modern ethnic border, although there's a lot of Russians all the way over to Odessa, right?
Well, they're going to have to move.
The other port. Anyway, the main thing, though, is whatever the border is, that can be worked out. But the concept of Finlandization, that you've got to have the ability to suppress hotheads. In other words, you can't allow the U.S. to run wild, and of course the way that the current situation occurred was you had the foreign minister of Germany, foreign minister of France, foreign minister of Poland, under the auspices of Merkel and of Ashton going in there and getting Yanukovych, right, the former president, to sign this suicidal deal where he basically gave in everything. Correct. And at that point his police forces collapsed.
Correct. Absolutely right.
So,
okay,
stay out.
We got a minute here or two. Shooting, bombs. Are they going to provoke the Russians into retaliating?
Well, that is the problem. You might say that the Crimea seems to have been pacified, but these places that I'm mentioning, Kharkov and Donetsk, are areas where the anti-fascist sentiment is very strong.
Right.
But they're not in provinces. They're not where the Russians have bases, and they're not in provinces that are on this, super autonomy or secession.
Hard to defend, yeah.
Harder to defend, and just today, right? We had I think it was the city hall of Kharkov was held by the anti-Kiev forces in the morning. Then the fascists came in, took it over for a while. Then they were kicked out by nightfall, and that might turn into gunfire at any point. But the main thing is, don't follow Kerry down this path. Indeed, I think it's clear that Kerry, my call to impeach Kerry of Skull and Bones is repeated and even more relevant than in the past.
I look, unfortunately, for this to turn to bloodshed very soon, manipulated by the West to force the Russians to react militarily.
Yes, and indeed, we have the company that seems to represent the continuity of Blackwater has been shipping people into Kiev, and they've then been going south.
Oh, really? East. Oh, they're already on the move.
And there are even stories about Israelis moving in.
Yeah, well, they're everywhere.
And being part of this. So whatever does happen, figure that some of this may also be mercenaries on
Count on it. Absolutely. Come on. If we didn't learn from Syria and Libya, we didn't learn anything. Mercenaries, high level, special forces, you name it. Dirtbag mercenaries, they're all over the place.
But no military solution, Finlandization.
Yep. Well said. Good job. Thank you very much for sharing.
See you soon, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.